Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Exercise Mechanic Podcast. I'm your host, Étienne Asselin, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by Gerald Ernat. He's a sports dietitian for the U.S. military as well as for Renaissance Periodization. Gerald, what's going on, man? Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on. Not much is going on too much right now. It's 8 o'clock here where I'm at, so just kind of starting my day.
That's right. That's right. It's interesting today you're talking about how for you it's early in the day. For me, it's late in the day. Right now it's 5 p.m. And we have one of the largest races going on in Switzerland actually today in Geneva. And I was actually concerned whether or not I was going to make it back home in time because of all the road closures and stuff.
No.
But while I was, cycling back from this event, I was contemplating what we could perhaps open up with today. And there's one topic in particular that really stood out for me, which was, I figured we could just kind of get right into the thick of it, which is, what are 3 nutrition myths that you think need to die publicly, that actively hold clients and or fitness professionals back? Why don't we start there? We'll start with the light stuff.
Oh, that's good. Oh, we're starting off strong. Okay. So I would say the first one is like the classic carbs are bad for you. Time and time again, I get people that come in and they say that, I'm avoiding carbs. Oh, I'm not eating any carbohydrates. In reality, they actually are. But they're thinking of the traditional, rice, potatoes, breads, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that would be the first one. Carbs are bad. Need to die.
Putting you on the spot here.
I know. Need to die. And then
not just need to die, but they need to die publicly in a really horrific fashion.
Oh my gosh. That's humiliating. That's legit. Okay. I would have to say, I get a lot of fasting. So I would say fasting is the way, right? People think fasting is the only way that you can go about losing weight or being healthy or promoting autophagy or improving longevity. Mm-hmm. And so for all of those claims, I'm not against, intermittent fasting for, specific populations, but, fasting for long periods of time, I'm killing that publicly for sure.
Let's go. All right. Well, we might pull on that thread after. What's your third?
Oh boy. Okay. I think the third, I guess it's not technically a nutrition one, but more of fitness. I guess it's fitness related to weight loss, but people think that more work, more exercise is always better, especially for losing weight. And so I've had experience with a lot of people that, are running themselves in the ground, doing 2-a-days, 3-a-days, you name it. And they not seeing that scale budge because of that. And they're overlooking the other variables that we should be looking at, right? Nutrition, sleep, stress, all of those other factors.
So let's say someone is, training 2 or 3 times a day. And like you said, they're running themselves into the ground. There's a huge energy expenditure, I'm assuming, associated to these workouts. How come that wouldn't, pun intended, tip the scale when it comes to weight loss? What are some of the factors that perhaps people forget about?
Yeah, so first and foremost is going to be nutrition. Some people just they don't know, if they're a tracker, they're not entirely sure on if they're tracking every little thing that they're consuming. The oils, the sauces, the drinks, the condiments, stuff like that. So that's a big one. Nutrition. They're just simply overeating. But then also I see a lot of people that work out really, really hard, maybe multiple times a day, but then the activity outside of those small workouts are next to none. And so we have also some other compensatory mechanisms in our body. We subconsciously will reduce our NEAT, our non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you're getting after it those couple times when you are working out, but then after the fact, you're laying around, not doing much. You're subconsciously not fidgeting, not moving, not doing active movement. And so those are the 2 primary things I would say that, are preventing people from losing weight.
So you mentioned just kind of in passing, like tracking food. And I think most of us know, if you want to, I guess, best accomplish, body composition change, you're probably going to want to track, intake and outtake, right? I think myself included, I think a lot of us sometimes take for granted the skill of tracking. In your opinion, what would you say is like, what are best practices for tracking, caloric or like macronutrient intake?
Mm-hmm.
And then specifically, I also wanted to touch on, because this is something I've seen a lot, is when people weigh their food, is it better like cooked or uncooked?
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So first question was, what are some major downfalls or things people are overlooking, right?
Or just like, what are best practices when it comes
Best
to
practices. Okay, gotcha.
accuracy with tracking?
Yeah, so like best practices that I found first is just finding a meal schedule that works for you. So then you can manage your meals throughout the entire day. So like for myself, I like 4 meals a day. It's just what works for me. I have a lot of patients, clients that are the traditional 3 days, 3 meals a day. I have other people that like to eat more frequently, so it's 3 meals, 2 snacks, whatever really works for you. Ideally, I say trying to eat 3 to 5 times throughout the day is a nice sweet spot for most people, and just sticking to that brutally consistently. That's the first thing that I have found with most people to, be consistent with their tracking. Another thing would have to be consistent tracking, and then keeping similar meals. So a lot of times people love, and this isn't to say that you can't be adventurous as an eater, you can't eat other things, but, a lot of times when people have less variety, I guess less like deviances from their normal, then they're less likely to deviate, right? So I typically have my same breakfast every single morning. It's just what works for me, and it's easier to track that way. Now, that doesn't mean I can't go out and go grab breakfast with, a friend. It doesn't mean that I can't switch it up, but that routine and rhythm is really helpful for most people. So I would say sticking to meals that you're familiar with and you like and you can be consistent with. So those two, and then find some form of self-monitoring. So, of course, like you can track your meals, you can track your calories, you can track your body weight regularly too. That has been shown in some research to be super helpful for weight management at the bare minimum. So if you step on the scale every morning, or if it's every other morning, however it goes, however you like and whatever works for you, that's a really effective tool that's rooted in research to help with, tracking progress. So I'd say those would be the 3 main things that I have found in like my experience for people to, stick to their goals and see progress.
And then looking at,
sorry, go ahead,
I was
Ryan.
just going to say, and then looking at the cooked versus uncooked when you're weighing your food.
Yeah. Typically it's dealer's choice. I always like to, kind of touch on like, hey, whatever you can be consistent with. So I typically don't like people tracking all of their stuff raw and then cooking it. And then the next week or the next day they're doing vice versa. Right. So first is like whatever you can just consistently do. Like for my proteins, personally, I like to cook them. I like to track them cooked, and that's because I can large batch cook them then. So I don't have to weigh out my raw chicken and then cook it every single time. So that can be really beneficial for a lot of people, just bulk cooking all of their proteins, beef, chicken, fish, you name it. And then for even like starches for myself, like baked potatoes and cooked rice, I track them cooked too, because I like to large batch cook things and then just kind of portion them out as the days go on throughout the week. For like fruits and vegetables, typically that's raw unless you're cooking them. So that's what I typically do too for those. But that's how I go about it. That's how I recommend clients do it, is first like find whatever works for you. If you want to track your stuff raw, like by all means, that's fine. but I always just tell them, hey, however you're tracking it in a food tracking app, keep that the same way every single time.
So one of the things that you've mentioned on a few occasions so far has been to kind of like do what works. So it seems like you take a relatively flexible approach, that there are certain things that matter more than others, but in general, there's an element of like, you kind of have to stumble through this and figure out what will work for you. For individuals who perhaps are so lost that they have no idea what works for them, how might you help them figure out like what might actually be strategies, like nutritional strategies or lifestyle strategies that work? Like, what are some of the hints or the signs that this would be something to hang on to? You know, for instance, like this would be a good breakfast for you based off of these things. What are some of those things?
Yeah, so I think one of the most effective things that I do, especially like working with the military, because a lot of these individuals, they don't have any nutrition education. That's not what they have. So what I like to do for people like this is to find what they're usually doing right now, and go through their typical day when it comes to diet and exercise, and then make little teeny tiny adjustments to their already normal routine. Sometimes they don't even have a normal routine. It's no rhyme or reason. It's, I eat 3 meals a day this day. Next day is, I skip breakfast. The next day it might be, I only had dinner that day. So for people like that, I say, okay, if we have no rhyme or reason, let's try and get, a baseline down. And so that's where I'm like, hey, okay, like we should try and have something when we wake up, right? We should probably be eating a little bit more frequently, because a lot of times when we go for prolonged periods without eating, we tend to overdo it when we finally do sit down to eat. So I guess I'm going off on a tangent here when it comes to that. But yeah, I would say when it comes to finding what works for them, I go off of what they're already doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess like what I was trying to get at is like, I've had some clients over the years that are seemingly just really disconnected to how food makes them feel, and even just asking clients to kind of start to pay attention to, just generally after you eat, how do you feel, as perhaps being an indicator about whether or not a certain food kind of works well for you. And I was just curious if there was something else that perhaps you use within the context of your work, given that you also work with very diverse populations, I think, from what I gather.
Yeah, I don't do too much. I think it's awesome that you have some people like even write down like, okay, after my breakfast, I'm feeling sluggish, or I feel great, or I feel bloated, whatever it is, right? I think that's awesome to kind of keep track of how you're feeling in those times. Your mood, like what are your stress levels? Like, if I'm super stressed out, that's the reason why I probably had, a whole pizza and 7 beers, right? So I think that's awesome. I don't think I really do anything like differently, to be honest with you. Yeah.
So something I'm curious about, something that's come up quite a bit on this podcast, usually in regards to more of like the training side and the coaching side with clients, is like meeting clients where they're at. From a nutritional standpoint, coaching them through diet, do you find there's a degree, you talked about at one point, and I do something very similar where, part of my intake form is like, what are foods that they are already eating and that they prefer to eat? And, basing a diet as much as I can around things that they've already eaten. Or, we were talking about food journaling. Does your practice differ from client to client depending on what you think they could be adherent to? So I think of, potentially somebody writing down a food journal and how they feel after every single meal might not be realistic, and then potentially leads to a worse outcome. So to what degree do you like meet them where they're at in terms of behavior?
Yeah. Personally, like the food journaling thing, that would drive me nuts. So I'm kind of in that same boat. Some people aren't going to do that by any means. So I guess I just have to pick my battles at that point. Okay, you don't want a food journal, sure, that's fine. But what does seem like a constant that you can stick with? 9 times out of 10, when I talk with people, I'm like, hey, let's try and eat 3 times a day, and they're like, oh, that seems reasonable. And they always think that I'm going to put them on some sort of like crazy restrictive, like keto, carnivore, intermittent fast, well, you name it, right? And insert whatever fad diet out there. So,
I thought that was a hybrid, the keto carnivore fasting diet.
Have you heard of ketovore before? That's a thing, apparently.
Ketovore?
No.
Jeez. Okay.
Ketovore. And then they, sprinkle on some fasting alongside of it.
It's like you just eat raw meat between 6 and 8 p.m. and that's it.
That's right.
It's some of the stuff people come up with. It's really impressive, honestly. But as far as your question goes, as far as like changing things, right? Like trying to meet them where they're at. That's why, like with my coaching, like online's a little bit tougher, but we have a bunch of fun like metrics that I can go off and be like, okay, hey, this last week we were averaging 100 grams of protein. Now our goal is 175. Let's try and make those small little changes from week to week then. Let's go for 120. Let's go for 130 this next week. And so, again, literally trying to meet them in the middle where we're at to get them into more an ideal scenario.
So actually...
Go ahead, Ray. Sorry, I keep wanting to interrupt.
So, God damn it, ET.
I got so many questions.
So actually what you're just saying about the protein target there actually leads me into one of the questions that I had. I recently watched a video of Dr. Mike and I think it was Milo Wolf. I think it was the two of them discussing somewhat recent research. I think it came out of Japan, talking about protein recommendations being potentially even higher than what we had believed them to be. Mm-hmm. I think they had shown data where it was they had seen like a positive result as much as 1.3 grams per pound body weight and potentially even higher. So have you seen this research? What are kind of your opinions on, what sort of ideal protein targets might be for an individual? And potentially if that changes with like an athlete versus Gen Pop.
Yeah. So I haven't looked into that specific study yet. I know it's been kind of doing its rounds right now, and I did see the video. I didn't watch it yet for RP, but that's definitely on my library. Don't fire me, Dr. Mike. But yeah, I haven't seen that. 1.3 seems pretty high, but there's also some previous research on super high protein feedings that has been really interesting. I believe. Oh, I'm blanking on the name right now. Oh, I believe it's Dr. Jose Antonio. I think he's from the ISSN. He did a protein feeding study on like 4.4, I believe, grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you do the conversion, I mean, that's what, like two grams per pound, right? Mm-hmm. So, and what I believe they saw in that research was what people with the ultra high protein intakes, they gained weight, but the majority of that weight was muscle. And I think they might have even lost some fat in addition to that too. So some really cool protein overfeeding studies have been going on. And so with like that new research, I think it's always nice to like take things a little bit further to the extremes, because then we can have a little bit more of guidelines, right? Agreed. So with like 1.3, I think it boils back down to, okay, do you just really love eating protein? Then fine. That's totally fine. If you want to eat a little bit more protein, I'm cool with it, as long as you're adherent to, your calories and making sure that you're not omitting essential fats or some carbohydrates for performance then too. So there's also on the opposite end of that spectrum that for like meatheads, you can build plenty of muscle on, even 1.5 grams per pound of, or not per pound, per kilogram of body weight. So, you can get away with a lot less for most people, but are you going to see astronomical benefits for higher? I'm not seeing it. I think there's going to be definitely like a little bit of a delay or a plateau as that increases over time. So in like what I do for people, there's a lot of numbers and figures when it comes to protein. You really can't go wrong with like about 0.8 grams per pound. That seems to be a nice sweet spot for most people. A gram per pound is the tried and true one. A lot of people always talk about, gram per pound, but it's definitely going to be individual specific, because I'm not going to put a 350 pound lineman on 350 grams of protein, especially if they're trying to lose weight. So in that case, when I have people that are larger or just have more body fat, I like to go off of lean body mass if we have that data, or closer to that 0.8 grams per pound. There's a bunch of ways about going about it, but I like to take a look at, okay, what's the client or patient, what's their situation right now? What are their goals? Where is their body composition at right now? And then trying to find something that falls along that large spectrum of protein intake.
So to kind of pull on this thread a little bit, you had mentioned that perhaps for a 350-pound linebacker, that you may not give them 350 grams of protein per day, especially if they're looking to, lose weight, and I'm assuming lose fat mass. So that might be an example of when you might purposefully go below 1 gram per pound. Could you perhaps shed some light onto the why? Like, what informs that decision? So that way trainers can also perhaps be informed with some of the questions that they should ask themselves, and when they might actually steer someone sub 1 gram per pound. And then also, when might you go, greater than the pound per body weight recommendation?
Sure.
And why?
Yeah. So for, why I wouldn't do it, I would say also so calories are going to be your main driver of weight loss. I think we all know that already, right? And so having more protein for those individuals on a calorie deficit, on, less calories than what most people like, is only going to take away from your carbohydrate and fat needs if calories are equated then. So that's why I like to make sure people are getting enough protein, but not astronomically over that enough mark, because it's only going to sacrifice your carbohydrate intake, which is beneficial for performance and recovery, but then also your fat intake, which is super, super important for hormonal regulation and, of course, absorption of other fat-soluble vitamins too. And so that's the reason why I don't like astronomical amounts of protein for most people in fat loss, unless, it might help them with satiety. It might help keep them full a little bit longer, but especially for, very large individuals, like the example I gave, 350 pounds, 350 grams, that's a little overkill in my opinion. So that's the main reason why I don't like ultra high protein intakes for weight loss. Also because you're not going to be really maximizing building muscle when you're in a calorie deficit anyways. So the end goal is keep all the muscle you have. Maybe you can build a little bit in the process, but primarily losing body fat.
Mm-hmm. That actually brings me to it. Sorry, I cut you off. Continue.
No, you're totally fine. I was just going to, talk about like when I would recommend like higher protein intakes, like you mentioned, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
I'll hold my question.
I think the big thing is, hey, as long as we're meeting like a minimum threshold, but you're a meat eater or you just love protein, we can go a gram per pound, maybe a little bit more, but just as long as we aren't sacrificing carbohydrates and fats to meet our caloric needs, then, if you're bulking, if you're trying to gain weight, a little extra protein likely isn't going to hurt you, just as long as it's not sacrificing your overall calorie intake too, right? So if, your goal is 3,000 calories, you need at least 180 grams of protein, and you eat 250 and you only get 2,700 calories, then we're sacrificing, that overall energy need to maximize building as much muscle as possible.
That makes sense.
What I was going to ask, when you're talking about, maintaining or potentially even gaining some muscle for this large individual, even if they're in a deficit, I think something that comes up in the courses that we teach is like the holy grail of, body composition change is like body recomp. And I think there's, a lot of differing opinions on it. Do you think there's some nuance to that conversation? And if you've got some, especially people that are quite high body fat, do you think that they have a greater opportunity of body recomp, even if they're eating in like a calorie deficit?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So there is some research showing that, body recomposition can happen. It's definitely a thing, but it's going to be dependent on a few factors. So the first one would be, you're more likely to gain muscle, lose body fat if you have a high amount of body fat. So that's one factor. The next one would be, what's your training status? If you've never lifted a weight before, your muscles haven't received that stimulus to be like, hey, let's grow. So if you're untrained or you're in a state of like detraining, so you haven't been exercising for a year, you are definitely at a greater potential of building muscle and losing body fat. And then the third, of course, is performance enhancing drugs. That definitely helps with building muscle and losing body fat, right? So those are the three factors, and it could be a combination of those three that will more likely help people do both of those goals at the same time. But if you're someone, like for myself, example, that has been exercising regularly for, I don't know how long, that is relatively, healthy body fat percentage and body composition and doesn't take performance enhancing drugs, I'm less likely going to be able to put on a significant amount of muscle and lose body fat simultaneously. But for newbies, I have some clients that like their body weight isn't really like budging at all, but from their check-ins, from their photos, from what they're saying, they're like, oh, my clothes are feeling looser. Their progress pictures, they're looking leaner. We're seeing more lines in them and they're feeling great. I'm like, okay, we're definitely likely losing body fat and building muscle at the same time.
You had mentioned earlier, we've talked a lot over this past few minutes, talked about protein intake, which I can't help but think about vegetarian and plant-based athletes at that time, because it tends to be, something that they actively need to prioritize as non-meat eaters. Excuse me. What are some considerations? I'm assuming that you have worked. Perhaps I shouldn't assume. Have you worked with either plant-based or vegetarian athletes in the past? Yeah.
Yeah, some. Not like an astronomical amount, but I've worked with a decent amount.
And so with those populations, how do you go about, what might be perhaps the minimum amount that you would really encourage them to hit, like that minimum standard of grams of protein per day, perhaps more so for an athletic population, so an athletic vegetarian or a vegan athlete? And then also perhaps how might you coach them through meeting or hitting that target? Yeah,
so first it would depend on, First it would depend on like what type of athlete they are. So for like an endurance athlete, I like, getting close to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight for like more endurance based sports. For more like strength power athletes, getting closer to that 1.5, 1.6 grams per kilogram seems to be ideal from what we know right now. So that would be the first thing, even for like vegetarian, vegan athletes.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up question on that? What do you think would explain the delta between endurance versus like more power athletes? You had mentioned like 1.2 per kilo versus, I think you said like roughly 1.5. What do you think would explain that delta?
Yeah, I would have to say that like those strength power athletes, the people that are like lifting heavily, they're pushing people around. They're probably creating more muscle damage than, those endurance athletes. So from like a recovery perspective, from like a, muscle protein synthesis perspective, that's what I would speculate why we need more protein for that. Because we know like lifting stimulates building muscle and, creates that anabolic response. So we likely need a little bit more protein to help supplement with that or create that synergistic effect.
Got you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you were
No, you're totally
teeing
fine.
yourself off for another point there.
No, you're good. So yeah, I would try and figure out first like how much they actually need and based on their sport. And then, I'm big on giving people just like a bunch of examples. So like, okay, here's some vegan, vegetarian food options. Let's try and get at least one of these high quality sources at each of your meals. And then just kind of do dietary recalls as the weeks go on to make sure we're meeting those minimum thresholds. So, some people, they still do shakes, they still do bars, stuff like that, even if they are vegan and vegetarian. When it comes to protein, some will still have whey if they're vegetarian. So I tell people, hey, let's take advantage of those. But then also the plant-based stuff too. And that would be, beans, legumes, tofu, soy products, a few of those that try and make the bulk of their protein needs for the day.
Okay, cool.
So to follow up with that, actually, I've seen a variety of different opinions on this when, prescribing meal plans or macros or what have you, looking at, so if we're tracking protein specifically, some people will only count protein directly from protein sources, i.e. meats, whey protein, etc. Whereas other people will count trace proteins. I know what side I'm on this. Do you think, again, like, is best practice counting all proteins, even if they're from trace sources, or would you say only counting it directly from like meat or, whole protein sources?
Yeah, so I typically like hey, a protein is a protein. It all counts. I even track it through trace proteins because especially for those vegan, vegetarian athletes that are hopefully eating a lot more, fruits and vegetables and not just, Pop-Tarts and Snickers bars or whatever else that is vegetarian out there. Those trace proteins can really add up over time. So that's what I like. I still don't want to forget about those high quality sources, but a little extra protein from some broccoli or whatever is not going to hurt you by any means, as long as you're accounting for your total daily protein needs.
Yeah.
Online, leading up to today, I was binging your content, and there was one thing that stood out that I wanted to kind of tee you up for a little bit today, which was that you made a post recently talking about how if your coach is still recommending percentages for macronutrients, you went so far as to say that they need to find a new coach. And I'm assuming the new coach is you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what are perhaps the limitations of using a percentage-based approach? And would there ever be moments when you actually might use a percentage-based approach, either temporarily or as your primary strategy?
Yeah, that was a rather spicy post that I put up.
We like spicy,
the algorithm
man.
game.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah, I was fishing for some angry people, but for like scenarios where I would really ever recommend percentage based, I can't think of any, honestly. It's really not an individualized approach. Yeah, it'll get you in the ballpark because at the end of the day you're eating the same amount of calories, but I can't think of really a scenario where I'm going to say, well, if we have to do percentage based, this is, if we are tracking, we have to do percentage based stuff. There are some acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges that are called. I know in that post, I think I referred to that. So there are, and that's based off of percentages for what is deemed as healthy. But, that's different from more athletic populations or people focused on like trying to transform their body composition. So that's just if we're eating within these recommended ranges, then we're going to be likely fine for that, but not everyone fits into that perfect box. So that's why I like more, tracking in grams and based off their body composition and their goals rather than just, you're going to do a 20-40-40 split or whatever. I've had a lot of people that come to me and like, I'm supposed to be doing this. And I'm like, why? Because the main reason, especially if people are like trying to lose weight, is let's say you need to eat 2,000 calories and 20% of that's protein. I can't do math right off the top of my head, but then you need to make a calorie adjustment and you go down to 1,800 and then you're still eating 20% of your calories from protein. You just dropped your protein by, 20 grams or something like that. And that is the exact opposite of what you want to do when you're trying to lose body fat, because protein is important to spare as much muscle as possible. And we don't want to reduce that to, create the potential for more muscle loss. And so that's why I don't like going off of percentage base, because they get titrated based on your overall energy intake. Whereas, my approach and a lot of coaches' approach now, which is, I firmly believe this is the right way, is to, make sure they're getting enough protein based on their current body composition and goals, make sure they're getting enough dietary fats for overall health purposes and hormonal regulation, all that good stuff. And then, titrate carbs up and down based on whatever goals they have. And of course, there's going to be some flexibility within that too. Some people like lower carbohydrate, higher fat diets. Some people like higher carbohydrate, lower fat diets, or like a healthy balance of both of those. But they're still eating adequate protein and they're eating the appropriate amount of calories for the goals that they have. Those are the big rocks. Those are the most important things.
Calories, grams of protein.
Yeah, that's typically the hierarchy that I like to do is, okay, calories, they're the main driver, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure we're getting enough protein is that next, but like really important step. Mm-hmm. Carbs and fats going to be more of a preference, but I tell people just don't take them to extremes and you're going to be A-okay. So don't go on a zero carb diet or a zero fat diet and we're going to be probably all right.
Cool.
So I also went through your social media and did some fishing. Picked out which things I kind of thought were interesting. So something that, again, we sort of talk about quite a bit, in some of the courses we teach. It's come up on the podcast a little bit when looking at body composition, the role that insulin plays. And I liked you had a post where people blamed insulin for their inability to lose weight. So can you kind of talk about what the myths are potentially around insulin? And then what does insulin actually do in the body?
Yeah. So when it comes to insulin, a lot of people think that insulin is the main reason why they're not losing body fat, because it is that fat storage like hormone, right? But we need insulin for a variety of purposes in our body. We need insulin to help, shuttle carbohydrates throughout our body too. So, it has a purpose, and your insulin levels are going to, fluctuate throughout the day. We just don't want them crazy fluctuated, right? So when it comes to insulin, those continuous glucose monitors are always like, a fad. I think, for some people it can be beneficial, just like if people like to nerd out on stuff. But I've had, clients in the past where they live and die by that darn continuous glucose monitor, and it drives them crazy, and it just creates more harm than good. Your body's going to produce the necessary hormones to deal with carbohydrates, and it'll help it, raise your insulin level or lower it, or, regulate your blood glucose appropriately in healthy individuals. Now, if you have a pancreas issue or something like that could be dysregulated, but that's where you need to talk with an actual doctor to get set up with the necessary interventions. So I think on the one you were mentioning, I was like, okay, everyone demonizes insulin, but here's that list of like reasons for what it's good for. I don't remember that list, but off the top of my head by any means. But like insulin's not the devil. It's a necessary, hormone in our bodies that does what it's supposed to do.
I was going to say, just as an extension of that, I think there's more and more talk about, insulin resistance versus insulin sensitivity. Insulin resistance potentially being at the very least, like a corollary to certain disease, at the very least, potentially being something that impedes progress from a body composition standpoint. It's very common in like the bodybuilding world about maintaining insulin sensitivity. A, do you think that that's important? And then B, what tools may you use to manage either like glucose management or like insulin sensitivity management?
Yeah, so I do think it's important. I don't think it's the end all be all by any means, right? But as far as like how managing it, yeah, like insulin sensitivity can be beneficial, but how we improve insulin sensitivity is the boring stuff that we all talk about every single day of our lives. And that's, eating a relatively healthy diet, controlling your overall intake, right? You can take that a step further and, control your overall carbohydrate intake. We probably shouldn't be eating a bunch of, added sugars and, going crazy with those. Controlling our overall calorie intake. Maybe for some people that are overweight, losing a little bit of weight can help improve insulin sensitivity. And a big one is, exercise, especially resistance training. That improves your insulin sensitivity too. So, for a lot of these problems that people like to create, the solution is typically the boring, not so sexy stuff. And that's, having a pretty decent diet and exercising regularly.
Do you see any benefit to over-the-counter supplements like berberine?
Berberine is a big one. I see a lot of people recommend it. I typically don't recommend it. I'm not really like confident that that's going to have an astronomical effect on insulin sensitivity or anything like that. That doesn't mean I'm, not open to learning more about it, but to be completely honest, I'm not super knowledgeable in any sort of research with berberine and that ultimate outcome.
This brings me to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you today, which is just what might be some of the supplements that you tend to recommend, perhaps for most folks, as a means of whether it be fat loss or driving performance.
Sure. Creatine monohydrate, the tried and true one, the king. If we're trying to increase power output, improve lean body mass, there's also some like more and more research coming out on like the cognitive benefits of creatine too, which is really cool. I'm pretty sure there was a research study just came out, like one high dose thing of creatine helped with like cognition or like mental performance in individuals. So I'm a big fan of creatine. I think most people should be taking it if they have any sort of athletic or body composition goals, and it's super cost effective too. So that would be the first one. Protein, of course, like whey protein, soy protein, vegan protein, really casein protein. Any of those are totally fine and they're good quality sources. So especially if you're really struggling to get your total daily protein intake through food, I'm always going to be recommending food first. But for individuals like myself and a lot of people that have higher protein intakes, protein shakes are a great tool to make sure we're not leaving gains on the table. No pun intended.
Cool.
So those two. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so vitamin D3 would be a big one for my area and the people that I work with. We get sunlight like half of the year or something like that. So the other half, it's dark and gloomy, like right now sun's coming out a little bit, which is really, really nice. But D3 is going to be helpful for like bone health, but then also, performance, muscle. And so making sure we're at a more optimal vitamin D level is only going to help those other body composition and performance benefits too. So those are like 3, maybe a multivitamin if I have a super picky eater or someone that like refuses to eat fruits or vegetables. But that's like one of those things that I love. I draw my foot in the sand and be like, no, you should be eating fruits or vegetables. At some point in our life, we have to, kind of grow up and eat like an adult. And
Right.
So when it comes to that, I always say like, just pick the stuff that you like. I don't care if you need to, sprinkle shredded cheese on it or whatever, like make it tasty. And for the love of God, eat a vegetable and I'm happy.
So this reminds me of 2 different, I guess, categories of questions, if you don't mind. And I know,
Yeah.
Rye, I saw you kind of chomping at the bit over there, Rye. So I won't.
I was
Hopefully,
just
this
going
won't
to make
take
a
too long.
stupid comment, to be honest.
Well, we'll still circle back to that. So the first 2 follow-up questions about the supplements was, I found that recently. So in the past, perhaps like 5-10 years ago, creatine, I found in the fitness industry, wasn't really recommended that much in fat loss phases because of this potential of, perhaps holding on to a little bit of extra water weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that recommendation, perhaps people are realizing that that's less of a thing, and that the benefits stemming from consistent creatine monohydrate supplementation would perhaps outweigh the slight water retentive tendency that could kind of come from it. What's your kind of take on creatine in fat loss?
Yeah, I recommend it during fat loss, and that's because, to my knowledge, that extra maybe teeny tiny bit of water retention is going to be intramuscularly. So it's the water retention is where we want it to be to make our muscles feel good, get a good pump, make sure they're hydrated, and a hydrated muscle is a happy muscle. So that's why, it's not the bad water retention that a lot of people think. And, water is good for us. It's not the devil. So I recommend creatine during fat loss, especially when we deprive ourselves slightly from like nutrients and calories and energy. Performance tends to dip down after a while. So
Right.
if we can kind of fight that by supplementing with, 5-ish grams of creatine a day, so be it. And if that helps us, get an extra rep here or there, or feel a little bit stronger, or, look a little bit more juicy in the mirror after a nice pump or something, then so be it. Because those are definite wins when you're losing weight and trying to lean out.
Yeah, I feel that. Yeah, looking juicy in the mirror. Talk about like primary fitness goal.
Yeah. Yep.
You had talked about how like sometimes you just need to be a damn adult and eat your vegetables, and it reminds me earlier on in this conversation, a question that I had that I've been holding on to are essentially like, what are some of the hills that you would die on when it comes to your profession, or like what are some of the lines in the sand that you're like, like I will not, like this is something that I will not entertain, whether it be like someone not eating vegetables just because they perhaps don't love broccoli or whatever. Like, what are some of the things that you will, like Ryan mentioned, you'll meet the client halfway in so many ways. And as much as that's true, what are the things that you're like, nope, sorry, these are like tried and true, you need to do these things? What comes to mind?
Yeah, the fruits and vegetables first and foremost, of course.
Be an adult.
Like, yeah, like I'm sorry, but if you value your health, you should be getting in fruits and vegetables in your day, and fiber sources. So that's a main one. I'm trying to think if there's anything else off the top of my head. One thing is like, being in severe deficits when we're injured or like pregnant. I see a lot of people that like, with my primary work, I have soldiers, they get hurt, they get bumps and bruises, they, get stress fractures, you name it. And they're trying to lose 30 pounds in a month or something crazy like that. And so, when we're in, fat loss mode and in a large energy deficit while injured, it's only going to delay and slow that healing process and cause more problems than good. So that's a big one for me, is not being, trying to lose a gob of weight in a short period of time, especially if we're injured. So, and then also for like females that are pregnant, they shouldn't be losing a bunch of weight when they're pregnant. It's only going to compromise baby's health and mom's health too. So those are some like lines drawn in the sand for me.
Cool.
How often do you recommend intra-workout nutrition?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Depends on, the type of workout that they're doing. So if they're just doing like a 30-minute arm bro workout, I'm gonna be like, you don't need an intra. Just go eat your normal meals and you'll be fine. But if you're doing like, an all-day basketball tournament or something like that, then I'm going to say, okay, let's try and get some Gatorades, some chews, some bars, some rice cakes, you name it, some quick digesting carbohydrates throughout the day to help with that performance and recovery, especially if you're doing multiple bouts of exercise. So, yeah, it would be highly dependent on, the type of athlete. For the normal Joe that just wants to go work out a few times a week just to get stronger, a little bit healthier, maybe a little bit fitter, I'm not a huge stickler on intra-workout nutrition for them.
That's something, just like on that note, I've noticed that like for clients that have been in deficits, like a sustained deficit for an extended period of time, and you start to notice like training performance really decreasing. One of the strategies that some of my clients, but not all of them, and I'd be really curious to get your take on that, and I'm happy that you brought this up, Rye, is that we essentially maintain like the same kind of caloric target that we had before, but that we take a little chunk of it and we add it intra-workout as a means of just hopefully driving a little bit more performance. Is that something that you've ever done, or would you ever do something differently? Or
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing what, 15, 20 grams of carbs does to somebody that's been, in a calorie deficit for a couple months. Same thing with like going back to like a diet break after a long fat loss phase, that extra, 50 grams of carbs, you're like, oh my God, I feel like a human again. So I think it definitely is, can have a benefit for some people, especially like even if it's a psychological benefit, not even a performance benefit, because the mind is a powerful thing. And if you think something's working, it likely is. So I'm a fan of it, especially if you're allotting it for it in the day and really your overall energy needs and macronutrient needs are the same, then sure. I think it's great.
Cool.
You mentioned having like a diet break. What role does a diet break or a refeed play in like a successful fat loss phase?
Yeah, so for a diet break, I like incorporating them. I do them more like auto-regulated or like reactively with clients rather than like proactively. Some coaches do it like, okay, every fourth week we're going to do a diet break. That's fine, but there's so many different ways that you can go about with like the art of coaching. But for my method, I like to get some variables on like, okay, how's your sleep? How's your stress? How's your performance in the gym? How's your hunger levels? And then once I start seeing that those are decreasing and not being so ideal, and then they're just starting to get a little bit fed up with everything, then that's when I start incorporating diet breaks a little bit more. And diet breaks are typically just what I tell people, it's like putting a pause button on fat loss for, a period of time. Typically diet breaks are like 1 to 2 weeks of eating at your current maintenance, not your previous maintenance before you started your diet and maintenance calories, right? So that's, the main gist of diet breaks is, it's basically just giving your body and your brain a little bit of a stress relief to help with compliance and make you feel good and refreshed to get back into a fat loss, like calorie deficit as time goes on. Refeeds can be beneficial for some people. They're typically like 1 to 2 days of higher calories, higher carb days. And they can help with like the psychological aspect of dieting, but then also like performance based. So like helping replenish lost glycogen. A lot of times when you diet, you feel depleted, that your muscles don't feel as full, you don't feel as strong, you're not having a ton of energy. And so refeeds can be beneficial to kind of refuel your body and set you up to have a larger tank of gas for the next week of training and dieting and movement.
Yeah, I love that. We've talked a lot today about kind of like the mathematics. We talked a lot in grams. We talked a lot, in terms of like calorie targets, et cetera. And there are many people that still very much practice intuitive eating, and in part because some of these folks might have like perhaps like little t or big uppercase T trauma, related to like some of the numbers around their weight, or perhaps they have a bad relationship with food and tracking calories, et cetera. But like, what's your general perhaps opinion on taking a slightly more intuitive approach, and perhaps when might you use it with someone, and then also when might you not?
Yeah, so I took a course on intuitive eating from like the lady that invented it, or like kind of coined that term. And the main message for intuitive eating is not a weight loss diet. Some people like to think that for whatever reason, I'm eating intuitively and I lost weight, so it works. That's not the ultimate primary goal of intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is to help people understand those hunger cues and better understand their body and respect their body to nourish it, but not feel so deprived and restrictive all the time, and not be guilty every time you put something in your mouth. So I love a lot of concepts of intuitive eating because it helps you like be more aware of your surroundings, like actually enjoy your food, think about, your feelings during that time. Like, okay, I'm, that like the pizza reference before. Oh, I'm eating a bunch of pizza and beer because I'm super stressed out, and this is what kind of, soothes me. Right. But just that conscious act of like, okay, this is why I'm doing the things that I'm doing is, really crucial for people that need to kind of realign their nutritional habits and their mindset around food. So I love the principles of intuitive eating because I think most people should be thinking about those things, like avoiding a bunch of distractions when you're eating, like enjoying time with family and friends and savoring your food, actually chewing your food, and like taking your time too. That was one thing that I didn't have like growing up, was like I just shoveled it in, and then 20 minutes later I'm hungry, right? So as you get older, you want to not be hungry all the time. And so so like those factors are really helpful for everybody. Taking it a step further, intuitive eating though isn't, for weight loss. It's not for like changing your body composition. So if you have a good relationship with food, maybe there's another way that we can go about it, right? But those principles are that I like everybody rooted in those, just to have a good relationship with food.
Love that.
So we've talked about different, trends and fads and whatever else within sort of the nutrition world. Has there been anything, in your time working as a dietitian or being a student, where you've had major shifts in like your views around nutrition?
That's a good one. Major shifts or views as a dietitian, like in my schooling or anything like that, you're saying?
Yeah. So, and kind of, let's say anytime within the last 10-ish years, something like that.
Yeah, I think I experimented with a lot of different types of, quote unquote fad diets when I was like first getting into like nutrition, not even like in my actual like degree. And so I would say some of those like life changing or like eye-opening things would be, once I got into more of like my traditional schooling, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't need to be doing like the next best, fad diet. I think that was the big one for me. Like, it doesn't even have to be like, I just need to find something that works for me and that I can do consistently, rather than, I'm, carb backloading or intermittent fasting or keto or Atkins or anything like that. So I think that was the big one for me, is like, when I first got into it, I was like, oh, I can, eat the stuff I like, but just have to be mindful about it and not go crazy, and I can enjoy life and reach my goals at the same time. So that was like the big one for me.
Cool. Earlier you had talked about, when we were talking about vegetarian and vegan athletes, you had mentioned protein sources. One of the words that came out was the S word, the soy word.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think about man boobs. I had
soy
man
boys.
boobs popped into my head. And so I'm curious, when it comes to perhaps like soy products, et cetera, for those populations, how concerned should they be about the effects of soy products on, breast tissue for men?
Yeah. Such a common myth is, soy causes gynecomastia in males. But, the dose makes the poison. There has been like 1 or 2 research studies showing that like really, really high intakes of soy can cause, elevations in like estrogen and gynecomastia and stuff like that. But these individuals, like if you actually read the research, they're consuming a ton of soy products. I think the one that I'm thinking of, they were drinking like, I don't know, liters of soy milk a day, like 2 liters, 3 liters. And I was like, oh my God, that's impressive. But
just peeing out soy.
Exactly.
That's right.
And so like, just like anything in life, like too much of it isn't good. We can drink too much water and it's not going to be good for us. We can drink too much alcohol. It's not going to be good for us. If we drink, 3 gallons of soy milk, it's probably not going to be good for us. So,
Right.
The dose makes the poison a little bit, even like a glass a day, that's not going to cause anything, right? It's likely not going to cause anything. Mm-hmm. But if you're going hog wild on soy milk, you're probably going to see some adverse effects. So,
well, in this case, it wouldn't be hog wild; it would be soy wild.
Soy
right?
wild, yeah. Sorry, yeah. So that's my take on it. Like, you can have some soy milk, and you're not gonna, grow a set of double D's overnight.
It's crazy. That's right. Yeah. Shucks, But it's one of those things.
My soy order right now.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But it's one of those things, like there's, like you were saying, there's so much fear around this, and people have been gotten really, I think, attached or very concerned about even like the slightest, like even like very small quantities. And to be very frank, I actually consider myself one of those people, and in the sense that like I just haven't really known, perhaps how much truth there is to some of these claims, whether or not the quality of the soy products make a difference or not. So I appreciate your hot take that so long as we're not, drinking gallons of soy milk, that generally we should be fine. And I also like that you left some room for nuance there. You can tell when someone's an expert in their field because they generally won't have just black and white statements. There's usually just a little bit of nuance baked in there because, there is a little bit of gray, even though it might look relatively black and white.
Yeah. And, I tell patients and clients all the time, if you, for whatever reason, you're like, oh, soy's the devil, right? Soy's going to kill me, blah, 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 blah. Don't drink it. There's plenty of other options out there that you can consume to reach your protein intake, to reach your calcium intake. So I'm not like, especially with like when it comes to food choices, I'm like, there's plenty of options out there. I am not a sticker on, you need to be eating, steak every single day. You need to be eating a banana every single day. No, there's plenty of other options out there that you can do. Especially if you hate that stuff. If you hate that stuff, how sustainable is this diet going to be?
Yeah, for sure. Ryan, I don't know if you have any other follow-up questions or if you want to get to our rapid fire. What do you think?
Yeah, let's hit the rapid fire questions.
Oh boy.
So
Here we go.
So we do this at the end of every podcast where we have a guest. So we just have some quick fire questions, more about you, not necessarily about nutrition.
Okay.
And the idea is just answer first thing that pops into your head, and then we move on to the next one.
Oh, shoot.
Cool.
Okay.
This is like when you do like a team building project, and it's like,
Yeah.
tell us an interesting fact about yourself, and you're like, fuck, I'm not interesting at all.
Yeah. You're like,
Like the most stressful thing. All right. So question number 1, what is your favorite book, movie, and concert?
Oh, okay. Movie, Nacho Libre. I'm a big fan of Jack Black, and it's just stupid humor. I absolutely love it. People think I'm crazy, but I could quote that entire movie. Concert. I went to a Panic at the Disco concert that was pretty awesome a few years back. So that was really great. Or I actually went to a Sam Smith concert, which I really enjoyed, like Sam Smith music, like, back in the day too. And so those are fantastic. So it's a toss up between those two. And then my favorite book, I was a huge reader when I grew up, like as a kid. And so I really got into a series that was called Redwall, and it was basically like a bunch of little animals, like having wars with each other, which was kind of wild. So it was like, they should be making this into a like TV series or movies, because I think it would be one of the next best things. But yeah, it's like kind of like more medievally, but like it's pretty cool. You have to look it up. I believe Brian Jacques is the author of that one. Yeah, Redwall by Brian Jacques.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, question 2. Favorite and least favorite food?
Potatoes is favorite. Got to go with my potatoes. Love it.
Dude,
they're versatile.
I saw your piece
Mash
of
them,
content.
cook them, stick them in a stew,
Yeah, where you're like, bad day to be a potato. I woke up today.
Yeah.
I nearly fell out of my chair.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So I love potatoes. I love a lot of foods. I would say the like one thing that I really don't like is mayo. I can't do it.
I'm with you, actually.
And like coleslaw. No. Mm-mm. Not a fan. It's more of like a consistency thing for me.
Question 3, proudest moment outside of business?
Outside of business. Proudest moment, the first thing that came to my mind, I just paid off my student loans this year. So that was a big one for me. After, 7 years of college, that comes with a nice little price tag. So I've been working my butt off and finally got those out of the way.
Nice. Favorite athlete growing up?
Shaq.
Nice.
Shaq Daddy.
This is, as a quick aside, I literally just saw this clip. I'm forgetting the guy's name. He was a former football player, but he's got like a podcast thing, and he interviewed a guy who dated a woman after Shaq. And the guy was like, don't do it. It's the worst thing for your ego ever.
Oh my
God. They were
God.
just like busting up laughing afterwards.
Yep.
On that note, question 5. What 3 values guide you in life?
Loyalty, honesty, 3 values. The third one's going to get me, I tell you.
Lists.
Lists? That's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll let you off the hook.
No, thank you.
Favorite and least favorite lift?
Favorite lift, deadlift. It's always been my bread and butter. That's been my strongest. Least favorite, I don't like doing arms. Sometimes it's like it can be fun to get an arm pump, but like just sitting there doing bicep curls, this is not very fun for me.
What's one misconception about you?
One misconception. I don't know. I don't know what people really think about me, I guess.
That's probably the most psychologically healthy answer to that question.
Yeah.
A very healthy answer. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. A misconception about me. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm sorry.
City or country that you'd love to visit?
Oh gosh. I want to go to Japan, Greece. Those are like top two, I would say right now.
Cool.
And our final question, what's one hard truth that personal trainers or coaches who are trying to grow their business need to hear?
You need to have interpersonal skills. You need to know how to talk to people. You need to know how to meet them where they're at, and like just be like, I don't know, just like treat them right. Simple as that. Like treat them like they're a person, not just a paycheck.
I love that. I love that. I apologize, Ryan. I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit. I thought of an extra rapid fire question for you, Gerald, before we wrap up. Fuck, marry, kill, carnivore, vegan, and paleo.
Oh, carnivore, vegan, and paleo. I'm killing carnivore for sure. I am going to marry paleo because I can still eat potatoes.
That's fair. That's the criteria.
Yeah. And then what was the last one? Vegan?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to fuck vegan.
Yeah. With a bag over her head or just
No. I'll respect it. Yeah.
Potatoes.
a sack of potatoes. Yeah. That's cool. Listen, man, it's been really fruitful, pun intended, of course, picking your brain because I find that, navigating the world of, nutritional, I don't say counseling, but like as a trainer, like giving nutritional recommendations to clients so that, the nutrition can have a synergistic effect with their training isn't always perhaps simple because there's just so much misinformation out there. And I know like myself, Ryan and like so many others really actively search for people that we can learn from and whose opinions we can kind of take a little bit more to the bank when it comes to helping us make nutritional decisions. So I really appreciate you shedding light on not only what your recommendations are, but also some of the whys behind the what and the how of, how you go about making those recommendations. I really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, Ryan, is there any other questions that you want to ask here before we close?
No, man, just really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. I apologize. There's a plow going on right outside my house, so I keep having to mute myself. So,
I didn't even, I was going to say, I didn't even hear it, but I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for being flexible with, coordinating this and everything. And it's been nice chatting for this last, hour or so. So thank you so much.
No, I mean, the pleasure, I think, is, at least for me, the pleasure is all mine. I'm taking all of it. Genuinely appreciate your flexibility as well, waking up early today on the weekend for us to have this chat. If people want to learn more from you, or perhaps if they want to work with you, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I'm probably most active on my Instagram, and it's just my name, at Gerald Ernat. And then if you want to work with me, I'm on the RP coaching site. So, Renaissance Periodization. We got a laundry list of some really awesome coaches. And I'm in there somewhere. So if you want to work with me, you can, reach out either on Instagram or on the website.
Love it. Love it. Well, once again, thanks so much, Gerald. I really appreciate it, brother. And once again, really nice to get to know you as well. And hopefully this won't be the last time that we get to connect on this platform.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Thanks so much again.
Pleasure. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye-bye.